What's going on, everybody? Victor here with a brand new video, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of a touchy subject in the MMA world for a certain fighter that we all know and love. His name is Tony El Kokoi Ferguson, and as we know, Tony has not had the best of luck lately in his last 3 fights. He is on a 3-fight losing streak. He is 37 years of age with a 26-6 record. He's basically done it all within the sport of mixed martial arts. He's a former interim lightweight champion of the world, and he's just, like I said, he's done it all within the lightweight division. He started his career out as a welterweight before making that transition down a weight class to UFC lightweight division, where he's done a lot of damage throughout the course of his career with the UFC. And now we're pondering the question of whether or not Tony Ferguson should retire, whether or not he should call it quits on his MMA career. And as we've seen during his last 3 fights, Tony has taken a unbelievable amount of damage. During his fight with Justin Gaethje, he took a lot of head damage. And during these last 2 fights against Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush, he's taking a lot of damage when it comes to his joints and ligaments. They've been stretched out to the point where his limbs could have possibly torn with his shoulder, because Charles Oliveira had him in a very, very deep armbar. He didn't tap because Tony is too tough for his own good. And then you also had the fight with Beneil Dariush, where Beneil Dariush had a heel hook on there, and Tony, like I said, he was too tough for his own good. And that's the thing that we all love about Tony Ferguson. He's never trying to quit. And that TKO loss against Justin Gaethje, it wasn't like Justin hit him with a good shot, clocked him, and Tony went to sleep. No, Tony was basically knocked out on the feet. The ref came in because Tony took an incredible amount of damage during that fight against Justin Gaethje, and he decided to stop the fight because enough was enough. He had seen too much, and Tony was already wobbling. He didn't want Tony to sustain any more damage. That referee was Herb Dean, one of the best in the game, and I'm glad that he made the right decision during that fight, because Herb Dean has made plenty of mistakes in the past, but we are all human. Like I said, Tony Ferguson is on the 3-fight losing streak. He's 37 years old. He's not in his prime anymore. He's in that age where the majority of fighters retire. Now, when we talk about fighters and retirement, there are a lot of fighters out there that wait way too long for their own good. I'm talking about Mark Hunt. I'm talking about Alistair Overeem. I'm talking about Alexei Oleinik. I'm talking about Cowboy Cerrone. I'm talking about Frankie Edgar, BJ Penn. The majority of these fighters wait way too long. And the majority of these fighters that I'm talking about, and I forgot to talk about this one fighter, Andrei Arlovsky as well. The majority of these fighters that I'm talking about are in their 40s right now. The majority of the fighters that I'm talking about are still fighting or are retired or were released by the UFC. Alistair Overeem was released by the UFC, and he is a complete legend in the game, but he was taking too much damage towards the end of his career. He was already in his 40s, and he was taking too much damage. He was getting knocked out by all these young studs. And the same thing is kind of going on with Frankie Edgar right now. His last 2 fights, he had a war against Pedro Munoz, a 5-round war, which he was able to squeak out that victory. And then his next fight was against another was against another fighter. Corey Sandhagen was considerably younger than Frankie, and Frankie ended up getting knocked out within less of a minute. Cowboy Cerrone, his last 2 fights, or last 3 fights, obviously he faced Anthony Pettis. It was a back and forth fight. It looked good right there. Then he ended up facing Nico Price. That fight ended up being a draw, even though Nico Price got a point deducted away from him. And then you had the last fight that he had against Alex Morono, who is a fighter that's considerably younger than him. He was supposed to fight Diego Sanchez, but Diego Sanchez ended up getting released by the UFC because of all the instances going on between him, the UFC, and his trainer/guru, Joshua Fabian. So they ended up putting Alex Morono in there as kind of a last-minute replacement, a couple weeks, short notice. So Donald Cerrone he didn't really have enough time to train for Alex Morono. He got knocked out in the first round, took a considerable amount of damage to the head. And when is enough for these fighters? Like I'm saying, obviously the majority of them are in their 40s or close to their 40s, and basically at the end of their careers. The thing with Donald Cowboy Cerrone and Frankie Edgar, the thing that both of them have in common is that they both have had a lot of fights in their career. They've both gone through many, many wars. And you can see the same thing with Andre Arlovski. You can see the same thing with Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt being another individual that has gone through nothing but wars in his whole entire career. That was getting towards the end of his career. Mark Hunt had even confessed that things in his head were getting hazy at times. He found it hard to remember a couple of things that were going on in his life and going on with his fighting career, which basically caused Dana White in the UFC to react as fast as possible and give Mark Hunt a number of fights left on this contract and not to re-sign him after his contract had expired, because he had gone through so many wars and it was finally getting to his health and to his head. And that's the thing that can go on when you're an older fighter. When you're starting to get up to those late 30s and to those early 40s, your age isn't the only thing that's getting older, but it's your body, it's your mind, it's your soul. You don't take as much damage as you used to when you were old. You're not as fast as you were when you were young. You're not as strong as you were when you were young. The only people that can really get away with these type of things fighting at the age of 40 or close to their 40s is obviously a fighter or certain fighters that have crazy genetics, such as a Yoel Romero, who's been fighting in his 40s for a while now, who's been competing with the absolute best in the UFC middleweight division before he got cut by the UFC, before they parted ways. But that's Yoel Romero. He is a complete specimen. He's built like a brick house. Not like these other fighters that are towards the end of their career that have retired or are still fighting to this day. For Tony Ferguson, the thing that I worry about the most is that if he keeps on going, he keeps on sustaining these damages towards his limbs, towards his ligaments, towards his head, his body, that he won't be able to absorb as much damage as he used to when he was in his early 30s and he was at his prime and basically murdering everybody in his way and finishing people left and right. This damage is going to linger towards the end of his career, which is most likely going to be soon, and also forward in his life as well. The one thing we worry about when fighters are fighting late into their career in their early 40s and sometimes in their 50s, if they're crazy enough, is CTE, dementia, Alzheimer's when they get old, and also the possibility of having arthritis when they're getting older as well, and barely being able to walk, barely able to stand, dealing with these lingering injuries that they had sustained earlier in their career, obviously recovered, but have come back in their old ages. That's the thing that we really worry about the most. We talk about boxing, how they go for 12 rounds, and back in the day where the boxers used to fight for 15 rounds, and some boxers would fight maybe 5 or 6 times a year. We talk about Muhammad Ali and the end of his life, where he could barely remember a thing. He was in a wheelchair, and he had so many different health issues that he was just a shell of his former self, and he was basically living life a little bit miserably because of how bad his health has deteriorated. Obviously, MMA fighters don't take as much damage as boxers. They don't fight as many rounds as boxers either, but still, these injuries can linger on later on in life, and the thing that these fighters really need to think about the most is that how long do they want to live for? Do they want to live until their late 70s, early 80s, or do they want to pass away suddenly, surprisingly, in their 60s? And that's something that everybody has to look forward to in the future, really think about. Is it worth it? Is it not? And a lot of factors really play into why fighters continue to fight in their old ages towards the end of their careers, in their late 30s, going into their early 40s. Is it the pride? Is it the money? Is it the fame? Is it the fact that they want to go out with a win and not a loss, which is why they continue to take fights and fights and fights? Obviously, BJ Penn being one of them. Obviously, towards the end of his career, it was just a lot of turmoil. He was getting in a lot of trouble on the streets of Hawaii. He was getting arrested basically on a monthly basis. He kept on losing fights with the UFC, and as as his life outside of the octagon continued to escalate and kept on going down into negative paths, the UFC just let him go. It wasn't worth it anymore because he kept on losing fights. He was basically in his 40s, and the UFC said, "Look, this guy's 40 something years old. He's losing fights, and he's getting in a lot of trouble outside of the octagon. That's someone that we don't want with our in our organization." And they let him go. And we don't know why BJ Penn continued to keep on fighting. He's already a Hall of Famer. He's already a former champion in 2 different weight classes, welterweight and lightweight. But he decided to keep on fighting. And I believe that he wanted to go out, that he wanted to retire with a W, but wanted to continue to keep on fighting because he kept on losing. But he wasn't able to go out on his own terms. The UFC cut him. And the UFC might cut these individuals as well, including Tony if he keeps on losing fights. 3-fight losing streak. If he loses one more time, if the UFC gives him another fight, another opportunity, if he loses, he's definitely going to be cut by the UFC, and his career is basically going to be cut in a way that we don't want it to. We want Tony, the majority of us are all fans. We all love Tony Ferguson. We love what he represents. We love how he represents the sport of mixed martial arts and himself and his team. And he made changes during this camp for this fight against Beneil Dariush, but it was just the same thing that we saw in these last, against those other 2 fights. We did see a little bit of flashes of the old Tony, especially when he was on the ground, when he had Beneil on top of him. He was trying to slice him out with some elbows, but it just wasn't enough. And the thing that Tony Ferguson really has to think about is, do I really want to keep on going? Does my family want me to keep on fighting? Is it really worth it at the end of the day? Is the money worth it? Is the notoriety worth it? Is my career really worth it at this point? I've done a lot in this career of mine. I've won a championship with the UFC. Even though it wasn't the official title itself, I still won it with my blood, sweat, and tears. And I've basically built myself a Hall of Fame career. I'm sorry about that, guys. Well, neighbors. But those are just some of the things that Tony really needs to think about in his life. He needs to think about himself, his family, and his life moving forward. What does he see himself doing in the next 20 to 30 years? Where does he want to be later on in life? Tony can be a great ambassador for the sport if he wants to retire. He can definitely do a lot of things with the UFC. He can definitely train a lot of upcoming fighters. But these are just some things that Tony really has to think about. And I pray that he does make the right decision, because I don't want to see Tony 20 years, 30 years from now in a wheelchair, barely able to remember anyone, and basically to have the same thing that happened to Muhammad Ali happen to him. So obviously, we'll have to see what happens with Tony Ferguson. Apparently he says he wants to fight again, but we'll see what happens. If you guys agree with me that Tony should retire, comment down in the comments section. If you guys think he should fight another fight before he retires, then say that as well. What do you guys think Tony Ferguson should do? And if there's anyone that you can really compare Tony Ferguson to towards the end of his career, who would it be? And also, what do you think the UFC should do with Tony Ferguson? Definitely a lot of things that are on my mind when it comes to Tony Ferguson, and there's definitely a lot of things that are on his mind, and only the future can tell what's going to happen with Tony Ferguson. But I just hope and pray that he makes the right decision. I appreciate you guys for watching this video, and stay safe, stay blessed, and just think about what Tony Ferguson should do in the future, and we'll see what happens. Later, guys.